and then maybe we'll have some time after to discuss what is left for us. Yeah, by the way, the recording is already started, so that we could steadily get started with our usual agenda. So yeah, I believe you already like look at the schedule, and previously I told you that you have the task synchronized designed for several weeks, and each week there is a module that could help you accommodate in some of the points that are listed in the async especially in terms of non-functional requirements. Let's say one of them is to distribute your application into the modules, as well as use Webpack as a bundler that could help you to put all together. And that's why we put like the task in the following way. So the current week, in terms of like theoretical parts, will be dedicated to the Webpack as well as like the NPM basics, so that you could quickly get started with the Webpack. Yeah, just one more thing from the production experience. There is like no need to get deeper into Webpack details. So possibly some of the questions could be on interview, but it's a rare case. So basically, whenever you configured your bundler within the project, so actually it's a one-time work. So you already configure it, and it works each time you're working with the application. So maybe some of the adjustments are possible, but it's not the topic that you'll face every time you're working with the code. So yeah, in case if you like start looking at the Webpack and see that there are lots of things that you're not aware of, so don't worry, it's quite normal. Um, and from the Webpack, you need to know how to get started, how it works, and to have at least basic understanding of its capabilities in terms of like configuration of itself, how to set up a plugin. Whenever you need like setting up some plugin, so basically, yeah, you just go, you find it. Let's say each plugin has its instructions how to get started. Um, well, I maybe we have like some, yeah, there is like the bunch of the examples of the plugins, and in, for instance, if we click this, you have the instructions how to get started with it. So yeah, basically from the Webpack perspective, you will need just a basic understanding on what the Webpack is, its capabilities, and how to set up a plugin using the documentation from the internet. So I believe that's should be enough in terms of accommodate the test basics as well as the requirements on the sync to set up the bundler. Okay, so yeah, the previous week like was the pre New Year Eve. So yeah, guys, one more time, I hope that you had an awesome New Year Eve this day. And it's also like I know that there is a hard time for every one of us, but I believe it's right about the time to like to have a rewind of the year and to recall not only the important things that's happening these days, but also what was inspiring you, some uh, to remember something good that was happening to you. So yeah, I hope that you have the awesome New Year's Eve, and let's go forward with our agenda. So yeah, basically we do not have much things to do this week. We're targeting to complete the async race. Yeah, and by the way, I remember the query from some of the students regarding that they're not like able to deploy their application from the private school repository to the GitHub pages. Yeah, remember that. Don't worry. This is like that's not the That's not the action that requires lots of time spending, but please give me some time to check everything in terms of repository permissions, whether they are sufficient to do so. So maybe some of you already accommodated with that. I would encourage you to help others also to achieve their goals, because that's one of the important things on the course is communication. Whenever you manage to solve the problem, that will be great. If you also will help others to do the same. Yeah, that's a little encouragement for you. Well, I believe there is no much things to talk about in terms of like the schedule. As usually, you see that we have a bunch of tests, and in terms of fast and grace, so I believe that should be enough for you to complete all the non-functional requirements listed here. Okay, before we move on and discuss your questions, in case of any, I would propose you to go through the questions that you left on the table. There is one quite important, but let's go one by one. So that was the previous question uh, that we stopped by. So let's move forward. Async Race project is mandatory to complete the course. Well, actually, let's rethink on that. All the all the home assignments are mandatory for completion of the course. Of course, there are like several um, coincidences or like some reasons why you're not able to accommodate this or that particular task, and maybe it's. I hope this is for good reason. So that's why you have mentors with whom you can adjust your deadline based on your situation. But let's agree that all the tasks are mandatory, and the rule is like the single for all of the students without any exceptions. So yeah, guys, let's not skip in the assignments, because it's mostly it will be helpful for you to be able to start working on the production projects, or even to pass the interview. The knowledge that you obtain within the course could be extremely helpful for you. So one more time, I'm encouraging you to make use of the course as much as possible. Okay, so I believe that's pretty enough. Should we deploy the front-end part of async? We should deploy front-end part of async race on GitHub, but how and where I can deploy backend part? So there is no need to deploy backend part. So basically, you need to deploy only the front end. The backend part will be single for every website you created. And basically mentor who will evaluate your task will also use the local version of the backend. So there is no need to deploy the backend part, only front end. So that's quite easy. So for now, I skip this one. I will leave it at the end since it's requires much more time to explain it. Could you please explain why it's better to generate the entire HTML content through JS but not in HTML document? The requirement which is relative to generation of the content through the JS file rather than having the HTML markup is not because it's better. The main reason we included this requirement is to show you how to work with DOM elements, how to manipulate with them. And just one quite interesting thing, that most of the frameworks or libraries that are working with the JavaScript under the hood has like the same markup generation under the hood. So they are like they do so because let's say in React on Angular, whenever you create the markup of the document, there are some attributes, custom attributes, or custom elements that make use of this or that particular framework. And to make it work together, all the markup transpiles into the JavaScript code, which actually generates the final HTML. That's quite interesting fact. But for your understanding, it's the requirement is not because it's better to generate the content via JavaScript. It's because you need to have a look at the DOM API and to fully understand how to work with them. Because sometimes it could happen quite often whenever you need to generate some dynamic content using JavaScript. So that this knowledge will come to the rescue. In any way, in a real life scenario, we would rather like create the static HTML file for everything, for every element that could be created using HTML without any dynamic content. So we could create the basic layout for it. But for other use case scenarios, the JavaScript will be used. For now, we restricted this behavior just for practicing a bit more on the DOM manipulation. Okay, so I believe that's quite enough for answering. So let's switch to the last one. What are the good practices for writing functions so it's possible for creating HTML elements? For example, function creating form with add, delete, raise, reset, buttons, and etc. Each field has to be created, have some attributes, be appended to wrapper so that the function can add up to be longer than 40 lines. So what is the good way to split it to smaller functions? Is creating the separate function for every element fine? Could you please show some code example? That's quite interesting question. That's I decided to left at the end because this is quite important. So first of all, I would like to say that the author has a great idea and things in the right direction by saying that the function can add up to be enormously huge, and that would be great to start splitting it up. So that's I will show you some examples in terms of functions, but that's up to you to decide how would you split up. But some of the examples actually I could show you. So let's assume that our application has the entry point. Let's name it as start. And speaking in terms of like our application, let's assume that we have like 2 lines of code that makes the rendering mechanism, 40 lines for logic itself, and some small adjustments also like plus 10 lines. Okay, so if we assume that we want to inspect the code to see how it actually works, it will be nightmare, especially if a function could have lots of lines of code. But it's absolutely okay if you would like write the single function at the very beginning because you don't have much experience in identifying the areas that could be separated. So that's why last time I told whenever I was answering the question, how I recommend to start writing the task is to start implementing the code using imperative approach, just one by one, and then you could rethink on how it could be improved. So first of all, let's assume that our function is more or less closely related to our task, right? We will like use our terms that we told previously. So let's assume we need to render. Let's do maybe like the following. Our goal is to render 4 buttons to create a form and to initialize some sort of logic. Okay. First thing to do. Let's assume that's your function, which is the entry point, has lots of lines of code. So first thing to do is that your initial function should not should not contain any logic. What do I mean? I mean that the logic itself should be moved to the separate function. So let's say the function start. Uh, what do we need to do? We need to render buttons. Render controls, I would say. Render controls, render form, then init logic, uh, init event listeners. That's just for your example. Okay, so that's actually in the in ideal world, your starting function will look like the following. So this is like the invocation of the steps. And then each of the function will do one thing. Okay, so render controls, let's say, for example, it will, by controls, I mean buttons or links to be navigated. Okay, so basically, whenever we start like implementing, let's assume that we have like some sort of, or maybe elements for each. Okay, maybe let's assume it take um, some elements from the constants, maybe that, just not to create that one. For each, so you're iterating through the elements and do the same document create elements, put in some styles right here, and appending something. Why not? Okay, so we see. Okay, whenever we render in only buttons, we have something that is repeated. So perhaps we could move it to another function that will make our rendering mechanism, and will in such a way we will avoid repeated logic to be invoked uh, in our application. Okay, one more hint here.
I mean, render elements, not controls.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Thanks. One more hint for you. Uh, last time you were making the inheritance task, as well as you completed this module, so you should have understanding of the object-oriented programming. So the main concept here is that uh, we could, well, actually, DOM API already has this concept, but I would say we could create our own logical wrapper and start using the classes, the objects, and the inheritance mechanism. So in terms like mm, of the elements, let's assume that we have a single parent for everyone uh, that has the render method, but it doesn't know itself how to be rendered. Okay, and instead of like creation of the functions that will separately render button forms, we could render all the elements. We could pass here every element that is created using some of the class. Let's say this is base element. That's just our parent class with common methods to be used. And we could create a class for button element. that will know exactly how to be rendered. Yeah, at the end it will go uh, the common method itself, but before doing so, it's most likely will set up the look and feel, like by setting the text, style, and so on, and other elements that could behave the same. So to have a more understanding on what's happening here, uh, this function has no understanding which elements we are going to render. And let's assume that the element is not like it's not the DOM element itself, it's the object, and we call render. At this moment, we have no understanding which of the elements will be rendered. What should know about this is the concrete implementation of the concrete class. I believe that could also be useful for you in case if you decide like to have a bit more flexibility and maintainability in terms of like using some common parts of your application. So to quickly recap, uh, uh, the initial function that calls at the very beginning should consist at as less functionality as possible. So let's tend to having the form like this, just having steps. Each of the functions should, in ideal world, should do let's say only one logic at the time and do it best. That's let's say render form will do only one logic for rendering the form in without having any side effects, and that's in the ideal world. And then you could make use of the OOP in case if you need to create some common interface for uh, for some set of entities that have the same interface, like the method render. So actually, it's the single interface for each of the elements we want to create. Okay, so maybe I answered the question fully, and that could be helpful to think on how can you make use of code splitting and how to refactor it a bit and make it more readable and maintainable. Okay, see that we don't have. Let's check one more time. Yeah, we don't have anything else within the table. So please let me know in case if you want me to expand on something, maybe something is not clear or you have some other additional questions to ask. So please do not hesitate to just unmute and ask. Yeah.
Are you ready?
Yeah,
Okay.
I was waiting for it.
Okay. So I do have a question. It's about excessiveness. For example, I will make a file, API.js, and there I will write like get cars, like start engine, stop engine, all of that. And it will turn into like more than 40 lines of code. And then it's like get winners, delete the winner. So everything is what I understood as behind that question is that like how excessive do we need to um, put those functions into separate files? Like
Well,
would be,
mhm.
for example, would be enough like API for cars and API for winners or something like that, or do we need like to actually put each of those functions into separate files? Because it's not gonna be 40.
No,
Like
okay.
what?
Sorry. Yeah, just to start answering. So create as function doesn't mean that this function will be reused in some of the places. In some cases, it could be a good practice to identify some parts that's doing some com let's say not common, but some concrete logic. So your examples are great, like add winners, delete winners. So you're keeping your functions as small as possible. So you're identifying logical parts. And whenever you start like putting the your init function like this, you will have a full understanding of what's going on here. So I would say keeping your functions like you named right now is a very good. So I would say that you need to keep your functions as small as possible, and they should do one thing at the time.
Yeah, I understand that the function should be small. It's more question about the file.
About
Like, do we
files.
need, yeah, like, do we need each file for each function? Is it better?
No, you could create one single file for managing cars and put everything in a single file that's related to cars. But at the same time, yeah, the functions, well, let's say your file could be something like utils file with a set of functions, right? But whenever you are making the class, so in that case, a class ideally should be, a file should contain only one class, one JavaScript class. But in terms of functions and constants, it's rather okay if we keep several of them within one file.
Yeah, okay, I got it. Thank you.
All right. Is there anything else you wanted to ask me or anyone else from the chat? Okay, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone.
Hey.
I apologize for this question. I have a feeling that it should been asked long ago. But yesterday we have a meeting with our mentors and some members of our group, and it appears that when we generate an add car method or generate car method, um, we do not create a method for generating an ID. We have to grab it. Let's say the backend part is responsible for creating this for us, right?
Well, basically, what we have right now in terms of the backend, we're not like going to change it. Yeah, I know that some things are not quite convenient, but let's assume that's what we have right now is what can we take from the backend. So in case um, you see that some of the API calls uh, are like missing some data, so perhaps this data should be taken somewhere. And could you please like be more
More
concrete?
specific.
Yeah, more specific.
Uh, I created methods for adding cars and generate some cars, and inside of them, I create a method for um, generate an ID for these cars. I because I cannot understand how else I can grab this car's ID to be able to update them or delete them. I've been told that the backend part should create this ID for us, but I cannot understand still how we can grab and modify it. Maybe you have some hints how to, mm, I don't know, how to communicate with this part. I did it manually. I do not understand. Is it a good approach?
I'm sorry, I was speaking on the mute all the time. Yeah. So,
Oh,
so the main idea, like I already see from the documentation that you have the access to the ID. So whenever you load the application, you already have like the IDs of the cars, and whenever we generate new, um, let's say you the generation is like the post method with some random data. We pass it from the front end, and in response, whenever we get the response from the post method, it's a common practice for the backend. Whenever you create something, it returns the same data, including the ID of the newly created entity. So whenever you create a new car, you see that in response, you get the ID as well. So whenever you put this data to your set of data on the front end, this already should include the ID.
okay. This is clear. Um, how can I get how can I get this ID back when I'm trying to update the car? I
So
should
whenever
be
you're updating the card, the ID is not changed. It's the same. So whenever you create a new entity, it's the backend gives the unique ID for each of them. Whenever you update the entity, is it doesn't mean that you change the ID of it. So basically, you want to change some of the parameters like color or name, but not the ID because it's unique.
right.
Okay, so did I answer all of your questions? I hope so. Uh, okay. Uh, looks like no one else wants to ask me. So are we good to close the call since we're clear? 1, 2, 3. I believe so. Okay, so I believe we're done for today. As usually, please do not hesitate to ask us whenever you face some issues, and your mentors, especially in terms of like uh, having discussion on which of the approaches should be applied in our applications, or maybe they could share with you some production practices that could be useful. But in any way, let's keep in touch with all of you in case you face some difficulties. And for today, I believe we're done. So thanks everybody for your attention and for your questions. I hope that it's quite was quite helpful for you. And see you next week.
Have a good week. Bye bye.
Have a good week. Thank you.